On Saturday, April 19th of 1997, Tony's Pizza and Pasta in Hardington, New Jersey received a call for a delivery for 2 pizzas to 196 Scott Road in nearby Franklin, New Jersey. When Jeremy Giordano answered the phone the first time the caller contacted Tony's, they hung up. The caller would eventually call back some time later. Giorgio, however, was suspicious about the caller, so he decided that he would tag along with Jeremy. The two boys left the pizzeria at approximately 10:30 that night. As Jeremy and Giorgio arrived to the house, Jayson Vreeland and Thomas Koskovich waited outside. Thomas was on the passenger side as he rolled down the window and told the boys how much they owed. Jayson Vreeland asked Thomas Koskovich if he had the money. Thomas reached into his pocket, but unknowingly to the victims, instead of reaching for his money, Thomas took out a .45 caliber semi-automatic and began to fire into the car. Jayson then took his .22 caliber revolver and also began to shoot into the car. Jayson and Thomas then took the bodies of Giorgio and Jeremy from the blood-spattered car and placed them on the ground face down. Jayson and Thomas then shot the victims once again in the back of the head and left the 2 pizzas that they ordered next to the victims. As Jayson and Thomas ran back to Thomas's car, Thomas said, quote unquote, "I can't believe we did this. I can't believe we did this." To which Jayson replied, quote unquote, "I love you, man," before they hugged and got back in Thomas's car. Before they made it back to Thomas's house, the boys stopped in front of a church in Franklin, New Jersey, got out of the car, and made the signs of the cross with their fingers. Once home, Thomas put the guns and his bloody clothes in a bag and placed it under a pane of glass outside of his house. An hour after the shootings, a motorist saw the car in a marsh with its headlights on and decided to call the police. As police searched the scene, they unfortunately found the dead bodies of Giorgio Gallara and Jeremy Giordano. Giorgio Gallara was born in 1972 and was a graduate of High Point High School. He started working at Tony's Pizza and Pasta in 1988. Giorgio saved his money and eventually bought the restaurant from the owner in 1993 at the age of 21. Giorgio had a daughter born shortly after he bought the restaurant. He enjoyed camping, and it was something he did with his daughter. On the night of his murder, actually, he had plans to go camping with her. She waited in Tony's parking lot for her dad, but he never returned. Jeremy Giordano was born January 5th of 1975. Jeremy graduated from Wallkill Valley High School in 1994, and he was on the wrestling team. Jeremy was known to take care of his family and would even help if money was short. One of Jeremy's cousins said that, quote unquote, "There are still people in my family who have never come to terms with Jeremy's death." A friend of Thomas, Christine Slater, contacted the police on April 20th after hearing about the murders. She told the police that Thomas told her that he always wanted to kill a pizza delivery person, coincidentally the day before the murders. A Scott Road resident gave police another tip when they told him that they had seen Thomas Koskovich's car on Scott Road the evening of the murders. During the police's investigation, it was discovered that Tony's Pizza was not the only pizzeria called to deliver to the house of Scott Road that night. The callers contacted several other pizzerias, but they all refused. Several pizzerias did not offer delivery, and another declined to deliver after the caller was vague about the address and could not provide a phone number for the home. So with no other options left, this is when the callers decided to call Tony's back. Police continued their investigation with tracing the number that called in the delivery. The police would eventually trace the call to a nearby Dunkin' Donuts. The surveillance cameras at the Dunkin' Donuts showed Jayson and Thomas borrowing a phone book at 10 p.m. that Saturday of the murders. Thomas Koskovich was born on May 6th of 1978. Growing up, his parents abandoned him, leaving him in the care of his grandma. His grandmother was described as an addict who abused painkillers along with alcohol. His grandmother also suffered from a gambling issue. Thomas would spend the majority of his time with his uncle, who was described as a career criminal and a drug addict. This resulted in Thomas starting drugs at a young age. He developed a habit of stealing pills from his grandmother and doing drugs with his uncle. Jayson Vreeland was born on September 5th of 1979. He moved around a lot and during his childhood was bullied at school and even ended up with a broken arm as a result. Jayson states, quote unquote, "I got into fights but only on the defense." Vreeland said that he started using drugs at the age of 14. Quote unquote, "I really acted out in school so I would fit in. The other kids saw me as the kid who would do crazy things and take a ton of drugs. It seemed every time I moved and went to another school, and being the new kid, I was picked on. The only kids who didn't seem to pick on me were the druggies. It was nice not having to fight all the time." 2 days after the murders, on April 21st of 1997, the two killers were arrested. Thomas Koskovich was arrested at his home in Franklin, New Jersey. 3 hours later, Jayson Vreeland was arrested at his home in nearby Vernon Township. At the time, Jayson's name was withheld by officials because he was a juvenile, but was later identified by his neighbors and acquaintances. Both were charged with the murders of Jeremy and Giorgio, but they were also charged with the possession of a .22 and .45 caliber handguns that had recently been stolen in a burglary, and they were found at Thomas Koskovich's house. Besides the firearms, police also found bloody clothes in a gym bag and Giorgio's wallet during their searches of the suspect's home. 11 days prior to the murders, police got a call to a robbery at a store called Adventure Sports. This store carried hunting, fishing, and camping gear, which included firearms. The suspects got away due to the building's alleged faulty alarm system. They stole 3 firearms: a .45 caliber semi-automatic, a .22 caliber revolver, and lastly, a .40 caliber semi-automatic. Police compared the guns found from Thomas's house search to those stolen from Adventure Sports and determined that 2 of the guns were used in the murders. Later into the investigation, it would be discovered that Thomas broke into the store while his friend Michael Conklin, who was 19 years old, waited in a getaway car. During the police interrogation, Thomas Koskovich, he admitted to everything. He confessed to the murders, he confessed to it all. Jayson Vreeland, on the other hand, claimed that he did not shoot the victims but shot at the dashboard. Jayson Vreeland, due to the fact that he was a minor at the time of his arrest, was placed in a juvenile detention center. During his stay, Jayson allegedly told an inmate that he only shot at the dashboard. He also stated that he and Thomas wanted to, quote-unquote, see what it was like to kill somebody. When police interviewed Jayson after his arrest about the Adventure Sports robbery, Jayson explains that the original plan was for him and Thomas to sell the guns to buy drugs and then sell said drugs. The plan also did involve robbing 2 police delivery drivers, which Michael Conklin was a part of. Michael, however, backed out, according to Jayson, once Thomas started talking about murder. Jayson recalled a conversation between Michael and Thomas to the police in which Michael asked Thomas, "Why pizza delivery men?" And Thomas replied, "They're easy targets. I just want to kill someone just for the thrill of it." Thomas Koskovich was arraigned in Superior Court in Newton, New Jersey. Thomas was held at Sussex County Jail on a $1 million bail. Thomas's lawyer, David Nufero, entered a plea of not guilty but did not contest the bail. Jayson Vreeland appeared in a closed proceeding due to his juvenile status and was ordered to be held at a juvenile detention center. Dr. Michael Dunn, the Sussex County medical examiner, testified about the findings of the autopsies performed on Jeremy and Giorgio. Dr. Dunn states that there were 2 wounds from the bullets that entered the right side of Jeremy's neck and exited the left side, explaining that the bullets killed Jeremy instantly. Dr. Dunn also found 2 more entry wounds in Jeremy's left knee and recovered 2 .45 caliber bullets from the knee. Due to the fact that the wounds on Jeremy's neck and knee were so similar, Dr. Dunn connected that Jeremy was shot in both locations with a .45 caliber bullets. Giorgio suffered 5 bullet wounds, which included a graze across his nose. Giorgio had 2 wounds on his right elbow and a wound on the right side of his face made by a large caliber bullet. Dr. Dunn then concluded that a .22 caliber bullet that entered the back of Giorgio's head was the fatal shot. Through forensics, it would be determined that Thomas Koskovich fired the fatal .45 caliber bullet that claimed Jeremy Giordano's life, and that Jayson Vreeland fired the single fatal .22 caliber shot to the back of the head of Giorgio Gallara. Due to Vreeland's age, Jayson Vreeland and Thomas Koskovich were tried separately. I will be talking about Thomas Koskovich's trial first. The defense called a clinical psychologist with experience in substance abuse. The psychologist explained that Thomas's history of drug and alcohol abuse, particularly Thomas's use of 4-eyesight. With that knowledge in mind, the psychologist concluded that Thomas had a substance abuse disorder. Substance abuse disorder, also known as SUD, is a treatable mental disorder that affects a person's brain and behavior, leading to their inability to control their use of substances, like illegal or illegal drugs, including alcohol and/or medications. Due to the fact that Thomas was under the influence of this drug at the time of the offense and his frequent use of the said drug, this resulted in Thomas's capability to commit the offenses knowingly and purposefully. It was diminished significantly, according to the psychologist. In rebuttal, however, a forensic psychiatrist called by the state disagreed with that conclusion. The psychiatrist explains that Thomas's memory on the night of the murders was excellent and concludes that Thomas's ability to act knowingly and purposely was not affected by the use of the drug. Christine Slater testified. She stated to the jury that she had a conversation with Thomas in which he stated that he wanted to join the mafia and become a hitman. Thomas explained to her that he thought if he killed someone, it would be easier to get into the mob. He also explained that he wanted to be a Navy SEAL as well. Christine explains in great detail about the plan that Thomas had discussed with her. Thomas's plan was to kill a pizza delivery driver by having the pizza delivered to a remote area. Then Thomas would kill the driver and steal their car. Thomas also admitted to Christine that he burglarized the sporting goods store. Stephen Madden, a Scott Road resident, testified for the state that on the evening of April 19th of 1997, the date of the murders, sometime before 10 p.m., he observed a blue Chevrolet Cavalier with a loud muffler pass his home. Then he said he saw the same car pass his home a second time roughly 15 to 20 minutes later. Two more Scott Road residents testified for the state and described seeing a car with a loud muffler and one headlight on Scott Road the night of the murders. The state pointed out the fact that Thomas drove a blue Chevrolet Cavalier, which had two distinguishing characteristics, a loud muffler and a damaged headlight. The state brought Michael Conklin to the stand. Michael testified about the robbery at Adventure Sports along with Thomas's plan to rob and shoot a delivery person. And according to Michael, Thomas also asked him to partake in the robbery and shooting along with Jayson. Michael continued stating that following the killings, Thomas bragged that he and Jayson had ordered pizza for delivery to Scott Road and murdered the victims. Then after shaking Thomas's hand, Thomas asked Michael, quote-unquote, how does it feel to shake the hand of a killer? Michael Conklin's testimony was consistent with the state's theory that Thomas committed the crimes to experience the thrill of killing. The state provided evidence from the search conducted on Thomas's home on April 21st of 1997. While searching Thomas's bedroom, the police discovered 5 strips of paper taped to the wall above a coat hook. On the papers was written, Weapon spot. Anyone else, we all kill you. Joe spot. Anybody else, he kill you too. Tom spot. Anybody else, he kill you too. Jayson spot. Anyone else, I'll kill you. Cocoa Puff spot. I'll kill you. Police also found during the search inside Thomas Koskovich's house 2 empty .22 caliber cartridge boxes, a gem photo identification of Giorgio Gallara, 14 gun magazines, a price list for crime-related items such as fake IDs, cards, a literature promoting credit card. Police also found items outside of Thomas Koskovich's home. Near the porch, a bag that contained the .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, also along with a .22 caliber revolver, blood-stained khaki pants, a pair of black gloves, and clothes, paperwork, and empty wallet later identified as Giorgio's. For the blood found on the khaki pants recovered from Thomas's home, the state presented a DNA expert. This expert states that she found a match between Jeremy's blood and those on the pants. She then states she also found a match on the blood found on Thomas's coat, a coat which he was wearing when he was arrested, and the blood of Jeremy and Giorgio. She also testified that Giorgio was the dominant contributor to the blood found on the black gloves that were recovered from Thomas Koskovich's house. At the penalty phase of the trial, in order to prove Thomas's guilt, the state sought to establish Thomas's depravity of mind and felony murder aggravating factors. Depravity of mind requires a corrupt, perverted, or immoral state of mind on the part of the defendant in excess of what was required to accomplish the murder. So it is not enough for the state to merely show the defendant participated in the victim's death without more. Mitigating factors are any fact or circumstance that lessens the severity or culpability of a criminal act. Mitigating factors include an ability for the criminal to reform, mental disabilities, an addiction to illegal substances or alcohol that contributed to the criminal behavior, and any past good deeds, among many other things. Aggravating factors are factors that refer to the circumstances surrounding a crime that are significant to raise its severity and punishment to the aggravated version of the offense. Aggravating factors are typically laid out by statute and vary depending on jurisdiction and specific underlying offense. Typical examples of aggravating factors include recidivism, lack of remorse, amount of harm to the victim, or committing the crime in front of a child, among many others. In response, the defense brought numerous witnesses. A social worker and mitigation specialist, Louis Nardon, provided an extensive testimony concerning Koskovich's family and background. She testified that Thomas was plagued, that his family was plagued by substance abuse and attempts to end one's life and domestic violence. The social worker explains that in her opinion that Thomas was raised in a home without boundaries or structure and was subjected to emotional neglect and abuse when his parents left Thomas to be raised by his grandparents. The social worker continues to state that Thomas's attempt to take his own life while awaiting trial illustrated the remorse that he felt. The defense called a forensic psychologist to the stand named Dr. Edward Dowry, who testified that Thomas was mentally ill and a developing paranoid schizophrenic with a weak grasp on reality. Dr. Gary Glass, who is a forensic psychiatrist, described Thomas as emotionally ill and affected by mental and emotional disturbances on the days of the murders. In rebuttal, the state used a conversation that investigator Gary Sandberg had with James Slater, an inmate in the cell next to Thomas in Sussex County Jail. Slater told Sandberg that Thomas would rather end his own life than go to prison because he was afraid of prison. Jeremy's mother read a victim impact statement in which she explained the impact and the feelings that her family had following Jeremy's death. She stated in cross-examination that her whole family would like to see Thomas Koskovich take the evil that he's done and turn his life over to Christ. She stated that they were not in favor of the death penalty. She's quoted saying, "I would like the jury to evaluate everything according to what they feel is their job to do according to the laws, and according to how they feel that they have to answer to their God." Thomas declined to make an allocation to the jury. An allocation statement is something that happens after the defendant pleads guilty, and the defendant is typically offered a formal opportunity to address the court to express remorse and explain personal circumstances that might be considered in sentencing. 11 jurors ended up voting in favor of depravity of mind aggravating factors, and 1 jury voted against it. Due to the fact that aggravating factors must be found unanimously, the 1 vote against served as the entire jury's rejection of depravity of mind factors. In regards to the mitigating factors, 10 juries found the defendant's age at the time of the murders to be a factor. 5 juries similarly found the defendant lacked a significant prior criminal record. The jury also found that Thomas experienced a significant sense of abandonment and rejection after his father left his family when the defendant was about 10 years old. The jurors believed that the rejection further deepened when his mother left him at the age of 13 to live with her boyfriend. The jurors found that Thomas was raised in a home in which infidelity, violence, substance abuse, gambling, criminal activity, and suicide attempts were all too common. 4 jurors concluded that Thomas's drug abuse starting at age 13 was a means of self-medication to deal with his long history of untreated depression. 12 juries concluded that Thomas being raised in a home without boundaries, structure, or positive role models led to him being subjected to emotional abuse and neglected by his family. 11 jurors found that Thomas was under the influence of a mental or emotional disturbance. Lastly, 2 jurors found that Thomas's ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct was impaired as a result of his intoxication. The jury, on the other hand, unanimously rejected these mitigating factors. Thomas was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance was insignificant to constitute a defense to prosecution. Thomas's capability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to confirm his conduct to the requirements of the law was significantly impaired as a result of the mental disease or defect, but not to the degree significant to constitute a defense to prosecution. Thomas's capability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct or to confirm his conduct to the requirements of the law was significantly impaired as a result of intoxication, but not to a degree significant to constitute a defense to prosecution. And that Thomas was remorseful as evident by his attempt to take his own life while awaiting trial. The jury unanimously determined that the felony murder aggravating factor outweighed the mitigating factors beyond reasonable doubt. The court sentenced Thomas to death on May 7th of 1999. For the robbery of Jeremy and Giorgio, the court sentenced Thomas to 20 years with the eligibility of parole after 10. He was also convicted with possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, and he was sentenced to 10. For the murder of Giorgio, he was sentenced to life with the eligibility of parole in 30 years. For the burglary of the sporting goods store, he was sentenced to 5 years with the eligibility of parole in 3. For the theft at the sporting goods store, he was sentenced to 2.5 years of parole, which was made consecutive to the burglary sentence. Thomas Koskovich was sentenced to life imprisonment plus 40 years with the eligibility of parole in 51.5 years. Thomas would eventually appeal the death sentence decision. In 2001, the Supreme Court overturned the sentence, and during the second trial, the sentence was changed to life in prison in 2002. The sentence was changed due to the fact that after a Morris County jury, the county was changed due to the fact that the publicity of the trial could not agree that Thomas should be sentenced to death. As for Jayson Vreeland's trial, Jayson states that when the pizza delivery people arrived at the house, Thomas quote-unquote just started shooting through the open passenger window of the victim's car. Thomas shot the driver in the head, causing what Jayson described as a quote-unquote huge hole. Thomas also fired at the passenger, and Jayson picked up the gun from the grass where it had been placed and began to fire at the dashboard of the car. Because he just wanted to prove that he was a friend of Thomas, he did not want to kill anybody and had pretty much more or less shot towards the dashboard. Jayson, however, in his prior oral statement to the police, said that he pulled out his gun and began firing at the same time Thomas did, and that Jayson ultimately fired 4 shots. Vreeland's lawyer blamed his client's action on his use of painkillers and idolization of his accomplice, Thomas Koskovich. "I am not a murderer. I am still a shy kid hoping to be understood," Vreeland said immediately before his sentencing. Dr. Paula Bornachak, a psychologist, testified that Jayson became dependent on Thomas, and their relationship was one that was submissive. Jayson saw Thomas as charismatic and a powerful leader. Jayson told her that Thomas never discussed the plan to shoot the delivery person, and that after Thomas started shooting, he yelled to Jayson, "You gotta do this with me," and Jayson decided to shoot at the dashboard. The doctor stated that Jayson also indicated that Thomas gave him some pills after the shooting. She concluded that Jayson's cognitive ability at the time of the shooting was quote-unquote reduced somewhat so that he could not have the full capacity to participate in a knowing and purposeful way. According to the doctor, this was the result of Jayson's psychological dependence on Thomas, Jayson's barbiturate intoxication, and the impairment of his cognitive capability caused by his witnessing of Thomas's shooting. On the contrary, the doctor also indicates that Jayson had the capacity to know that the holdup would take place, and that he was able in a purposeful and knowing way to accept the gun from Thomas. The doctor also did notice that there were some discrepancies between Thomas's police statements and the version that he told her. She relied upon the latter. Latter meaning the second of one of 2 things or people that have been mentioned, ultimately leading her to choose to believe Jayson's versions of events. An expert called by the state concluded that Jayson acted purposefully and knowingly. Due to the fact that Jayson Vreeland was a minor at the time of the killings, the state did not seek the death penalty. Jayson was convicted of helping lure the men to a dark, lonely country road so he and his friend could see what it felt like to kill somebody. On February 25th, 2000, Jayson was sentenced to life behind bars for his part of the murder of Giorgio Gallara, and another 20 years added for Vreeland's aggravated manslaughter conviction for the death of Jeremy Giordano, then additional 22 years for the robbery and burglary charges of Adventure Sports. The judge ordered Jayson to serve his sentences consecutively, leading Jayson to ultimately life in prison with the possibility of parole in 51 years. Jayson showed no reaction during the sentencing. Noticeably though, his eyes were red, appearing as if he had been crying before the court proceedings began. Jayson appealed the decision. The appellate court denied the request and affirmed the conviction and the consecutive sentences for the 2 murders and armed robbery, but ordered the remaining terms to be served concurrently. Jayson then applied for a post-conviction relief, also known as PCR, which is a legal action taken after a prisoner has been convicted of a crime. There are many different types of post-conviction relief, but one of the best outcomes is a motion for a new trial. That request was denied by trial court and then by the appellate court. Jayson would eventually age out of the juvenile detention center, making his way to New Jersey State Prison, where him and Thomas both reside. Jayson Vreeland will be eligible for parole on October 18, 2044. He will be 65 years old. Thomas Koskovich will also be eligible for parole on October 20th of 2072. He will be 94 years old. That is the end of today's video. In this video, the victims, Jeremy and Giorgio, received justice for their murders. The killers will spend their entire lives, or a very huge chunk of their lives, in prison. They will have plenty of time to think about their crime and determine whether their quote-unquote thrill kill was worth it. Until next time, be safe, Earthlings.